Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, our lovely guest speakers are in the house, so we can start. Welcome, everyone, here at the Old Lutheran Church, also known as the Aula of the University of Amsterdam. I want to welcome you all to this exciting event with Mariam Barghouti, a writer and journalist from Ramallah, and Ilan Pappé, an historian now working in Exeter University. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Erella Grassiani. I'm an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Amsterdam. And as such, I'm very happy to welcome you here in this important building for us. In the last decades, I've done research on issues of militarism, security, nationalism in Israel-Palestine. I'm also one of the co-founders and board members of Gate 48, Platform for Critical Israelis in the Netherlands. And I was asked today to moderate this afternoon together with Eduard Cousin, who will introduce himself briefly.
I'm Eduard Cousin. I worked for over 10 years as a journalist in Egypt. Came back 2 years ago to the Netherlands, first working for the Dutch public broadcaster on Israel-Palestine, and then after more than a year decided to make a move to the Rights Forum, and I'm now working as a journalist for the Rights Forum.
Thanks. So this event is organized by the Rights Forum. The Rights Forum was founded in 2009 by former Dutch Prime Minister Andreas Dries van Acht. It works to promote a just and durable Dutch and European policy on Palestine. The organization's explicit and consistent reference framework is international law and human rights. And in name of the Rights Forum, I first want to take the opportunity to thank Angelique Eipe for making this event possible. Yes, you did a lot of work. Thank you very much. For arranging this event, but also for all your efforts over the years as civil servant and later from outside of the buildings of the Dutch ministries. Also important to note is that this event was made possible through all the generous donors of the Rights Forum. So the event today is scheduled as follows. I'm going to make it brief so we have enough time with our guests, of course. We will start with a 20-minute talk with both speakers, one after the other. And after that, all four of us will take a seat on the stage. We'll have a few more questions from us as a follow-up with both speakers on the stage. And then, of course, there will be enough time for you in the audience to ask your questions. So if you think of a question during the talk, think about how you will pose it briefly, concisely, and with a question mark at the end. I want to introduce our first guest on the stage, Mariam Barghouti. She's an American-born Palestinian writer, journalist, blogger, researcher, and commentator, living, as said, in Ramallah, Palestine. She's known for her political commentary and research that has been featured in outlets such as CNN, Al Jazeera English, The Guardian, BBC, New York Times, and many more. She has also contributed to various books and anthologies. She's further known for her calling out media outlets for the double standard when reporting on Palestine, and I'm sure that will be maybe also something she will talk about in a bit. And she has consulted for monitoring and evaluation missions in the Levant in the past years. Mariam, you're welcome to take a seat. Thank you.
Welcome, Mariam. Thank you for being here. I want to start with the first question. That we have a Minister of Foreign Affairs here in the Netherlands, and he says there's a ceasefire in Gaza. It's fragile, but it's holding. We see in the media repeating about a ceasefire in Gaza. You, coming from Palestine, what would you like to tell this minister?
I think he should hire better researchers from the ground, maybe. So there is this misconception that there's a ceasefire, right? And that also comes from the fact that this entire thing was framed as a war, not as an attack against Palestinian existence. And so what we're seeing on the ground is an attempt, again, to manipulate international audiences into thinking nothing is happening, but that's because Palestinians aren't attacking Israelis. However, Israel is still very much attacking Palestinians. The ceasefire never held. It was broken more than, I believe, 400 times, if they counted properly. And in the West Bank, what we're seeing is a silent war. So if we look at a ceasefire holding, it also comes from this attempt to separate Gaza from the West Bank, to continue dividing and fragmenting Palestinians rather than seeing them as a whole, right? And it helps facilitate the continuation of the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So just because bombs aren't, they still are being dropped, but because they're not being dropped in the scale that we have been used to in the last 2 years, doesn't mean Israel stopped. In the West Bank, which is, and let's recognize that Gaza is 365 kilometers squared. The West Bank is nearly 6,000. So the prize for Israel in terms of territorial expansion is the West Bank, and it is moving in full force on that regards. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's something that what really struck me in the past months, that the bombing indeed never stopped on Gaza, maybe a bit lower level, but it continued, and at certain moments that it went back in full force. Like a few weeks ago, it was actually election day in the Netherlands. You had a night that Israel was bombing Gaza and killed over 100 people in one night. Headlines in the Netherlands the next day were Israel resumes ceasefire after nightly attacks or after deadly attacks. Like what does this headline tell you?
Again, it's this headline tells me the complicity of media. It shows me the ineptitude of journalists and the continued attempt to cause misinformation for audiences. It's because we have seen so much mobilization in the last 2 years that stems from the recognition when people know, people do. And it's the complicity of Dutch media. Before Palestinians are erased on the ground, and we keep repeating this, before we're erased on the ground, we're erased on paper. We become non-existent, so there's no problem to happen if, it's not mentioned. So yeah, it tells me about the media's complicity and insistence to adopt the Israeli narrative. And it shows you the devaluation of Palestinian lives, that it's okay for 100 Palestinians to be killed overnight, that people weren't outraged when thousands of Palestinians were being killed in Gaza, even before the latest genocidal campaign that Israel waged. But we needed, 50,000 Palestinians, namely children as well. Not that women and men, don't matter, because we all constantly see this focus in media also. We focused a lot on the children because it's as though Palestinian men and women are okay to be killed, and people wouldn't mobilize for them. So it shows me the complicity of that and the real need to work domestically on journalistic integrity and to recognize malpractice not just as a concept, but as something that should be, that journalists should be legally liable for.
And you say journalistic malpractice, like you're being interviewed a lot in Western media, and you feature in prominent international media. And how do you deal then with talking with this media, but you say, often have journalistic malpractice or complicit in a way?
Yeah, so Edward, you're saying interviewing, right?
Yeah.
And then in reality, I'm being interrogated. I'm not being interviewed. And that's what I mean, journalistic malpractice. A lot of the times, the line of questioning is very reminiscent of an interrogation I've had by the Israeli intelligence, the Shabak. It's the same. Rather than ask for information, we are put on trial to kind of try and prove our innocence as Palestinians. That's on the one hand. And the other hand is we saw there's this attempt to bring Palestinians on only if they are going to share their sob story. Always bring Palestinians to talk about their personal narrative, never as experts only as opinion, never as fact. So I've constantly had to challenge that, and it really is exhausting, and that's what I mean. It's also journalistic malpractice. It lacks the ethic of interviewing, trauma-informed interviewing, and it lacks the journalistic obligation to do your research beforehand, to know what to ask.
And when you say you feel like you're in trial or on trial and being interrogated, could you give an example? What kind of questions are being asked then?
Yeah, I mean, so there was, for example, an interview with BBC where we were speaking about the West Bank, and I mentioned that there's a genocide happening in Gaza. The correspondent tries and flips that and says, oh, well, but you can't really be using the word genocide for the West Bank. Is that what you're saying? I tried to reflect back. I was referring to Gaza. If you were listening to my answer, you'd recognize that. But also, yes, the West Bank falls within the broader genocidal regime of ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing takes many forms and manifestation. Genocide is one part of that, because in the West Bank we see soft ethnic cleansing. They drop bombs on Gaza. In the West Bank, they create an unlivable environment, a hostile environment, to push Palestinians out. And then comes the lovely question that everyone loves to repeat: do you condemn Hamas? It's just, what? One, what does that have to do with anything? Two, again, it comes back to recognizing that we are there on trial. Whether you condemn Hamas or don't condemn Hamas is the starting point of how to cast doubt on your answers afterwards. They often begin with that or end with that, and that's so manipulative because it means everything else you said hinges on your answer to that.
Yeah, I must say, like I've seen clips of you in media, and I admire you, to be honest, a lot in how you on air, live, with these kind of questions, know how to counter them and yeah, you speak back and not falling in that trap. I think it's something that I personally can learn a lot from, and I believe a lot of people. So yeah.
I want to say, oh, thank you. But that's such an important point because you're saying in live interviews, right? And I don't think people recognize here, but in the last 2 years, a group of us Palestinians that do make media appearances kind of made a pact to only do live interviews because recorded interviews were often edited out. So we actually just had to learn how to be on trial.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's also another way of manipulation, how we try to override it.
You live in Ramallah on the West Bank.
Yeah.
You already mentioned some things about what's happening there now. Like we see unprecedented levels of violence happening there. Coming from there now, can you tell us a bit more, like what's going on?
Yes, so what we're seeing is a strategic and systemic attempt at pushing Palestinians out, away from the world's eyes. Because if you look at things through the lens of oppression Olympics, what's 1,000 Palestinians killed in the West Bank to 50,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza? So it becomes really hard to acknowledge what's happening. And at the same time, there's this separation, again, of Palestinians. And what's happening is this strategic, systemic, and premeditated assault on Palestinians that's coordinated by the Israeli militia groups, what Israel likes to keep calling the Israeli civilians, illegal settlers in the West Bank, who are armed with military-grade weapons, and they operate very much like the Haganah, the Irgun, and the Palmach Zionist gangs of the 1948 massacres. And they're pushing Palestinians slowly out in joint coordination with the Israeli military and the judicial system. So the settlers create a hostile environment for Palestinians to reach lands, the army provides protection, and then the Israeli courts then designate those lands as state lands because, oh, look, they look so unlived for, or haven't been lived in for months. So it's now state land. So they're working together, and what that means for Palestinians is a disruption of daily life. Our cities and towns are turned into battlefields and training grounds. In the last couple of months, Palestine in the West Bank Palestine has been literally a military training ground where they're bringing hundreds of new soldiers and training them on Palestinians. So it shows you how the West Bank has become the new Gaza before the onslaught, the open air prison, the laboratory of battle-tested weapons that Europe loves so much. And it's a horrifying scene because we keep telling ourselves, hang in there, but how long can we hang in there when there's guns to our head and a constant attempt at murdering us? You know, when these settlers go and attack Palestinian farmers, they're not even just throwing rocks anymore, right? Mm-hmm. They're going with spiked clubs and hitting Palestinians on the head. That's attempted murder. So it's difficult. It's a disruption of daily life. And they're doing something very smart, very, very smart. They're targeting any life-sustaining resources. So water wells, the agriculture. And what that means is that we're unable to sustain ourselves there. So they're going to try and push as many Palestinians out from the West Bank. This is a scenario, one of the scenarios that could happen. Push as many Palestinians from the West Bank out. Those that remain, will place them under military law, kind of like they did with Palestinians with Israeli citizenship now in the 60s, and then maybe slowly assimilate and give citizenship to those that stay. And that's what's happening in the West Bank. It's very horrible. I don't have the language to explain it to you in the urgency and the horror that it is to experience it. But I do hope that you can acknowledge the sincerity of my words, but it's really terrifying. It's ugly.
And that's in general, like living there, but then you also work as a journalist. And we know that Israel intentionally targets journalists. How do you manage? How do you cope in such a situation? How do you work?
Yeah, so Israel does target journalists specifically. I mean, we remove our press insignia from our vehicles at this point when we're traveling between districts. And how do we manage? We stick together, and I think the most we do is we recognize every day can be your last, or you can be arrested next week for a report you put out. But it's so important, I think, for journalists to remain on the ground and that's why Israel targets journalists, because a journalist isn't just a reporter. In us and with us are thousands of testimonies. And I think that's what makes the work of journalists so important. We access so many segments of society in so many areas. But we stay safe, by sticking together and recognizing there is no safety at all. And still do it anyway.
Previously in an interview, you said, like, we as Palestinians, we know Israel. We know what Israel is and what it does. So after the 7th of October, 2023, we knew what Israel was going to do. But then you said the only thing, what I didn't expect, and I quote, that the West would be so disgustingly complicit. Can you explain that complicity, and can you also tell more about why did that surprise you? What did you expect from the West, and what does that tell you about the West?
Yeah. October 8th, actually October 7th, afternoon, I think all Palestinians and anyone well-versed on the Palestinian case had the same thought. We're gonna witness an unprecedented massacre. As Palestinians, I remember looking at my friends saying, we're all gonna die. And we knew that. But what we didn't recognize is, one, the scale and the cruelty that Israel was going to reach, and the international community's allowance for it to continue. No arms embargo, continued diplomatic immunity for Israel. And what I realized is, not only are and at the same time in media, you see the complete disregard for Palestinians. Palestinians died. And for the longest time, they kept saying this many Palestinians died, according to the Hamas the Hamas control, is it still working? Yeah. The Hamas controlled Ministry of Health to delegitimize those statistics. And we saw that manipulation, manufacturing of consent, and still Palestinians resorted to all avenues available, including documenting their own killing on social media. And yet the world didn't move until 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 Palestinians were killed. A couple of hundred wasn't enough. A couple of thousand wasn't enough. The near destruction of the Strip is what it required for people to just have the basic decency. Palestinians aren't asking anyone to come fight for us, just to speak out, just to say something. And it took so long for that. And it tells me, yeah, how brainwashed, namely the West, Europeans and the West in general, are. And it shows me how undemocratic Europe is. So I'm speaking about Europe, but like the US also as a case in point, in cracking down on this discontent and this refusal to be complicit. So it showed me those areas, and it really showed how Palestinians weren't fighting Israel, we're fighting really the world. The world was ganging up on us.
So it's obviously a very bleak picture you paint and describing the situation and complicity. Yeah. You've said earlier, you mentioned something like Israel's intentionally engineering despair.
Yeah.
And when I heard you saying that, that really appealed to me. Like that despair is, I think, also something that haunts me often. And when we talk about it, like these things are horrible and terrifying. But I thought, can you maybe tell a bit more about like what do you mean with intentionally engineering despair, and how can we deal with it? How can we cope with it?
Yeah, so this is something I've noticed in the last 2 years. Really, it was really painful to see. But you'd notice that the only bits of news that we managed to get out were always about the Palestinians being decapitated, turned to mincemeat. It was always the horror stories. And that was very intentional. We didn't see any reports about the little movements that were happening, the changes that were, ooh. Yeah. The changes, we didn't hear news about the changes that were happening, the little movements, the small successes, and that's very intentional because they do the same thing to Palestinians. They pacify us. In the West Bank, the mass detainment of Palestinians, 21,000 in the last 2 years alone, including minors, the acts of rape in these torture camps, essentially, was the main purpose was to pacify Palestinians. The fact that we're seeing record high of arbitrary arrest of Palestinians, again, it's so you start thinking, oh, if I do this, this will happen, and it discourages you. And at the same time, all you keep seeing is Israel as the monster. And that's so you can believe that it is unbeatable as well. So it's this engineering of despair. You know, 2 years of trying and thinking nothing is changing will do something to you as a person. And it's so important to challenge and confront that. And it's still doing that by also through ways of denying us access to platforms and this kind of censorship, so we don't speak with you, we don't see each other. It is not without coincidence that the Israeli regime does not allow Palestinian detainees to travel afterwards, and Europe designates them as terrorists, even though they were held without trial or charge. It is not without accident that the Israeli ambassador to the Netherlands tried to cancel this event, and yet here we are and speaking with each other. You know? And it's a full house. It's incredible. It's all of this, again, is to engineer despair. And I guess I will end on this note, but it's so important to confront and challenge that, because I have been so down in the last few months, and I kept asking myself, why are you still on the field? Why does it matter? Why are you documenting? And then I come here and I see so many great efforts happening, And yeah, it's incremental, and yes, it's small, but it reminds us that this is gonna sound very childish, but it's like, haha to Israel, like, look, we were heard. Because they keep telling us you will never be heard. And it's a rupture of this isolation. It's very, very crucial, I think, to break that form of censorship and closures.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to introduce our next guest, who I think all of you for sure know. Ilan Pappé, Israeli-British historian and social activist. He's a professor of history at the College of Social Sciences and International Studies at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom. He's founder and co-director of the university's European Center for Palestine Studies. And he's, of course, known as one of the new historians, so-called, who uncovered archival materials and basically were the first scholars to challenge the dominant Zionist discourse, especially about what happened during the Nakba. He further is the author of many best-selling books. A few of them, well-known ones, is The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, A History of Modern Palestine, The Israel-Palestine Question, The Forgotten Palestinians, and many more. Ilan, please welcome.
Welcome, Ilan.
Thank you. Great to be here. Is this working? Good. Okay.
I'd like to start with a small anecdote. I was meeting Ilan Pappé yesterday already, and I told him I had to admit I only read one book of his, and then he said, like, well, you have 30 more to go. So yeah, I'll start tomorrow.
Good.
To start with a first question. Here in the Netherlands, it's still proclaiming oneself an anti-Zionist or criticizing Zionism is still a pretty difficult position to take. You see, even among so-called or progressive parties, that outright rejecting Zionism is a bridge too far for them. You see from more the Israel lobby groups that say like, oh no, this talk against Zionism, people don't understand Zionism and everything. Now, if there's one person in the world we can ask about how we should understand Zionism, I think it's you.
Okay.
Can you tell us?
I'm sure many in the audience don't need me to explain to them what is Zionism. We have quite a few Palestinians in the audience who know what Zionism means on the ground. But it's a fair question. It's a fair question because it is misinterpreted, mainly for the purpose of saying that if you're an anti-Zionist, you're an anti-Semite. And if you are an anti-Zionist Jew like myself, then you're a self-hating Jew. So it is important to define Zionism. And I think there is a difference between the historical definition of Zionism and the definition of Zionism today, although they have much in common. What they have in common is that Zionism is an ideology of a settler colonial movement of European Jews who were unwelcome in Europe, to say the least, and with a very weird alliance of people that included Christian evangelical Christians, British imperialists, and other interested actors on the international scene believed that the best solution for the anti-Semitism in Europe is to impose a European Jewish state on the heart of the Arab world at the expense of the Palestinians. As it developed into a state, it was very clear that, as in the beginning of the project, if you want to impose such a structure on the Arab world, on the Muslim world, on the people of Palestine, you need to do it by force, by coercion, by violence. And as such, Zionism turned from an ideology of a settler movement into an ideology of a state, of a regime in a state. And this ideology, apart from believing that the whole of historical Palestine belongs to the Jewish people and the Jewish settlers of Palestine, they also believe that the Palestinians are aliens in their own homeland and are the main obstacle for the success of building a Jewish democratic state in Palestine. So there's no soundbite for Zionism. There's no soundbite for anti-Semitism. Our big problem is, of course, that we are not always allowed the space and the time to explain. And it's important to demand the time and the space to explain. But all in all, I think that when the United Nations in 1975 defined Zionism not in the beginning of the project, when already the project was very clearly a fact on the ground in 1975, when it defined Zionism very much in the same breath with apartheid in South Africa, a form of racism, it was an accurate description of the ideology, especially from the perspective of the victims of Zionism, the Palestinians.
And then we're here in the 21st century, and when policymakers in the Netherlands and the rest of Europe are talking about Palestine, they hardly talk about Zionism and its nature and the problem with Zionism. They talk about the peace process, also accords, about two-state solution, and you were fairly early on criticizing this so-called peace process. First of all, what's wrong with it? And then, even though we already knew for a while that this is not leading anywhere, why is it still so persistent in policy circles?
Yes, the peace process is based on, the so-called peace process, is based on few assumptions that make it totally irrelevant to the reality on the ground. And a few of the assumptions were there from the very beginning of the so-called attempt to bring peace between Israelis and Palestinians after 48 and between the community of Jewish settlers and the Palestinians before 1948. The first assumption, and we already encountered that assumption in the Balfour Declaration of 1917, is that the Palestinians have no say in the future of Palestine and the future of the Palestinians. The only people who have a say are the Zionists and later the State of Israel. That's an assumption that is still very much part of the discussion about peace, and you could see it during the Oslo Accord. You can see it now in the conversation of the day after. You consult the Israelis, as you consulted before the Zionist movement. What do you think is the best way forward for the future of historical Palestine, nowadays namely Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip? And once you get the Israeli offer, you go to the Palestinians and say to them, this is the best Israelis can offer you. If you accept it, you are good Palestinians. If you don't accept it, you are warmongers, and you prove once again that you miss opportunities for peace and reconciliation. That's the first assumption. The second assumption is that Zionism is a Jewish national movement that has similar rights to the land as the Palestinian national movement, which is historically wrong. The Zionist movement is not a national movement with the same right as the indigenous people of Palestine. As I just explained, it's a settler movement that was determined to dispossess the indigenous people of Palestine. And therefore, what we are looking for is not a resolution between two national movements. We're looking for a resolution between a third generation of settlers and the indigenous people or native people of Palestine on the basis, hopefully, of justice, equality, transitional justice, or more concretely, with solutions such as the return of the refugees and granting the Palestinian self-determination all over historical Palestine, as other people were granted after the Second World War.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a follow-up question on that. Like, when you're talking about third-generation settlers and indigenous population and a way forward between those groups, like I can still see in a context of 10 years ago, but probably I'm already naive, but then I would still perceive it as like, oh yeah, I can see what you mean there. But now what we have witnessed in Gaza for the past 2 years, how could a Palestinian simply ever trust an Israeli third-generation settler, as you say, in living together? On the other way around as well, like how can somebody, part of Israeli society, like, after this dehumanization that you've seen in Gaza, that becomes pretty accepted in whole of Israeli society, how can they rehumanize Palestinians? How can they ever see Palestinians as human again? How does it look like?
Yeah, well, it's not the only case in history where you have sometimes a century, sometimes you have 2 centuries of bloodshedding, of violence, of dehumanization. And then if there is the right and just way forward, there's a way of dealing with it. Sometimes it's a long process of re-educating people, deprogramming, if you want, people. That by itself is not a good enough reason not to work for the liberation of Palestine, for the decolonization of Palestine, for bringing justice and an end to ethnic cleansing and genocide. I do believe that if there is a will to base the future of historical Palestine on all the features that the Zionist project denied Palestine, for instance, organic connection to the rest of the Arab world, the right of refugees to return, equality for everyone who lives between the river and the sea. If these assumptions are going to guide us into the future, and most importantly than anything else, allowing the Palestinians to be in the driver's seat towards that future, then I'm sure that it is possible to rebuild confidence between people despite even the worst kind of history. It won't be the only place in history where people killed people, sometimes by the millions, and learned how to live together later on. This country is one example for that as well. So it's a place with normal people, and people can move from hatred and dehumanization to a different kind of relationship. The question is there the will to do it? Is there the right ideological and moral position? Then everything else will fall in place, even sometimes it will take time, sometimes it will be more difficult. Whites in South Africa are getting slowly used to the fact that they're not living in an apartheid state anymore. I'm not saying it's a similar case, but it's just a similar case of showing that people can develop a different kind of relationship. And let's remember, before 1948, Muslim, Jews, and Christians coexisted peacefully in Palestine, and not only in Palestine, in the Levant, in the Eastern Mediterranean, all together. This is the right model for the future, not the model of a Palestinian Bantustan next to a Zionist state, which is the two-state solution, which should be buried deep in the ground. And we need the past in many ways to direct us and make sure that we're going back to their genuine coexistence between different groups and living together peacefully as they did before, without idealizing it, but with saying this is a normal life, and then you can deal with the other problem. The most urgent issue we have here, that Zionism, especially now, maybe always, but especially now, Zionism became an ideology that drives Israel to seek the annihilation and elimination of the Palestinian as a people, as a nation, as a country, to expunge them out of history and out of their homeland. Our role is to stop it and defend the Palestinians from that kind of planning, from that kind of ideology. The moment we succeed of doing that, I do believe, as normal human beings, we will find a way of building the infrastructures needed for better life between Jews and Arabs, Muslims and Christians and Jews in Palestine, and not only on Palestine, the rest of the Middle East.
I have so many more questions.
I'm here.
Earlier you argued that like such a change, what you're advocating now, will not come from Israeli society itself. The Israeli regime will not change by some force from within. What can change it?
Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that Israelis don't agree with me. It's one of the reasons they wanted to cancel this event. Not because they have a counter-argument, but they don't want the person who argued to argue. Yes, I'm afraid that there are no dynamics of change within the Israeli Jewish society that come even close to understand what is wrong with the reality on the ground, for understanding why there is violence, what is the way forward, realization that you do find among many, many Palestinians, to my mind, but not among Israeli Jews. So there are no dynamics of change. This is not the only case of history when the world was watching oppression, repression, ethnic cleansing, even genocide, and the world said, unfortunately, that kind of regime or that kind of political system is not going to change from within. Now, I hope, as an Israeli Jew, I hope that what we did learn in history, that sometimes you needed a lot of military force in order to save people, is not the case here. That's probably easier for me to say than Palestinians, because I have family, I have friends. Of course, I don't want them to be hurt in the process. I do believe that the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement that was established a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, offers a non-violent way of pressuring from the outside. Maybe it will not be, optimal method or the only method of changing the reality, but we have to try it. We haven't tried sanctions. We have tried boycott. We have tried divestment. We haven't tried sanctions, so we don't know yet. I don't want to give a judgment of something that didn't happen yet. But it's my intuition more than anything else, that a severe regime of sanctions, especially by Europe, against Israel would begin to change the reality on the ground in a very significant way, and I also think would lead at least some more conscientious Israeli Jews, because I don't want to demonize 8 million Jews who live between the river and the sea, would convince more conscientious Jews that there needs to be a different approach to who they are, what they were doing, what they are doing, and what they should do in the future. So pressure from the outside is an alternative for the lack of change within Israel, and hopefully would be so powerful that you could tell the Palestinians, maybe your resistance can now rely on the same international community that was the most important factor in making you refugees, losing your country, dispossessing you. Maybe the same international community can rectify, and especially Europe, can rectify the injustice it imposed on you 120 years ago.
You say specifically Europe, but that makes me think that the US is the financially, military, the biggest sponsor of Israel. So why is that then specifically Europe?
First of all, Europe is a bigger trade. People don't know that, but Europe's trade with Israel is more important than American trade with Israel. in numbers, just in numbers. Secondly, Europe created, not America, I mean, I have a lot of bad things to say about America, and I don't want to see them in the Middle East, and I know that they are now the main, of course, supporter of Israel, and we need to see a change in America as well, no doubt. But, you know, we are a bit like physicians. We're dealing here with an illness called Zionism. And we want to go to the origin of the problem, not just to the symptoms. I do think that the American support for Israel is a symptom of a wider problem. It's not the reason for the problem. And the problem is Europe. Europe came out with a decision, especially after the Second World War, that the only way to deal not only with the genocide of the Jews in the Second World War, but also the genocide of other people in Europe during the Second World War, that the best way is not to call upon the Jews of Europe, stay. We want with you to build a Europe that would never allow another Holocaust. Not one European intellectual, not one European diplomat, not one European politician said to the Jews, please stay, we will make Europe a safe place for Jews. On the contrary, they all, without any exception, said, what a brilliant idea is for you to leave Europe, to colonize Palestine, to dispossess the Palestinians, and we are all happy. We won't have you in Europe, and the Palestinians would be blamed for what we did to you. This is something that has to be reopened. You know, pressure and impact on reality is not just a matter of money and arms. Of course, an arms embargo is important, financial embargo is important. I'm not underestimating. But there's something about the conversation you have with the Palestinians and with the Israelis that has to come before the action itself. You need a framework. You need a conceptual framework. You need a moral framework. You need an ideological framework to discuss sanctions, to discuss boycott. Otherwise, people would say, so why shouldn't you work more on South Sudan than you are working on Palestine? You need for Europeans to understand the complicity in conceiving the idea, implementing it, maintaining it, and defending it. And then the second sentence, if it needed be, is to explain to people what does it mean to maintain the project from a Palestinian perspective. And then I think you could see the difference between the United States and Europe. And definitely, America has a very important role to play. You know, practically speaking, if tomorrow not one sanction is imposed by the United States, by Europe, or at least the EU, is united in its decision to impose severe sanctions on Israel, this would be a dramatic, transformative event in the history of modern Israel and Palestine.
Thank you so much, Ilan, for your wise words as well. So I said we'll have a few more questions for our guests from this side, and then there will be enough time for questions from the audience. Shall I start one? Do you have a? Yes. Okay, so you already mentioned the BDS movement earlier, of course, and I think it's something to maybe talk a bit more, because it's something that is practical, especially we talk about boycott for people here as well. So this is also a bit of a shout out to many people sitting here, many people watching also online who've been last few years, some even much longer, have been working very hard with a call for boycott, both academic and cultural. In our university, University of Amsterdam, very recently, these efforts were fruitful with the new guidelines about cutting ties with Israeli institutions. So I think I don't have to ask you if you support the boycott, but I think maybe you can say something to all of these people that are working so hard on the ground How is this productive? How do you see this being productive, that we continue with asking institutions, both so on all kinds of levels, but our universities, but also our cultural institutions, to not host Israeli-sponsored artists, for example. Just example, tomorrow there is a concert in our huge, beautiful concert building in Amsterdam here by the cantor of the IDF for a Hanukkah celebration. And there will be a lot of protests tomorrow. Sorry? Tomorrow. No, tomorrow. Against his performance, but also in support, of course. Yeah, so maybe you can both, I want to ask you to comment on that. How can we keep hope and doing this hard work on the ground?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think a boycott is a tough conversation with a necessary tough conversation we have with the Israeli Jewish society as a whole, and in the case of academic boycott, with the Israeli academia. Boycott is not between governments and governments. Boycott is between societies and societies. So it's a message from the Dutch society, not the Dutch government. It's a message from the Dutch society, not to the Israeli government, but to the Israeli society. If you think, as a society, that the fact that maybe you are not explicitly involved in the crimes against the Palestinians, then you are absolved as human beings, morally, legally, or legitimately, then you're wrong. You are complicit whether you are taking direct part in this or you are allowing it to happen. This is true about academics or artists and so on. Secondly, if you feel that there is no problem of representing a state that right now looks like a genocidal state, we have a problem with you. Not you because of who you are, but because you choose to represent the state. So, because you come as a symbolic representative of the state, through you we are sending our message as a society to the state. As a society, we don't have the power to sanction you, we don't have the power to cut trade relationship with you. We have the power to cry out against you, and that's all we can do. Now, is this important? This is highly important. We know the very constructive role boycott played in bringing down the apartheid regime in South Africa. It is never the only method that changes reality. Palestinian resilience and resistance is important, even more in bringing a change. But nonetheless, every successful decolonization, liberation struggle we know of in history had this combination of boycotts by societies, solidarity by societies, eventually pushing governments to take action, and by this enhancing the chances of those who are colonized. I will end by reminding people of the example of South Africa, but people tend to forget. Governments in Europe regarded the ANC as a terrorist organization, and Nelson Mandela as an arch-terrorist. And the movement in support of the ANC started by some women who work in a supermarket in Dublin, who refused to do the account for a lady who had quite a lot of products from South Africa in her trolley. And they were fired. These women in the shop were fired. But it was a chain. So afterwards, everyone in the chain went on strike because of that. And the chain itself began to boycott South African goods. It took 21 years from that action for the first European government to impose sanctions on apartheid South Africa. The BDS movement is young. We have a feeling sometimes that it's been there for 55 years. It hasn't. It's young, it has an accumulative effect, it already has achievements, but it has to continue, and we have to double and triple our efforts, because history teaches us it is a very important factor. Needless to say, of course, There's something much to be said for being on the right side of history in a time where so many people are obviously on the wrong side of history.
Thank you. Mariam, do you want to? Thank you.
Thank you, Ilan. I concur, and I'll add maybe a few things. We need to also recognize boycott is a bare minimum. It is the most nonviolent form. It is a practice of you at a most basic level saying, I refuse to engage with crimes against humanity, and if there is a debate on whether crimes against humanity are being committed, then I refuse to engage until we get that sorted out. So you need to refuse on both ends, because Israel will keep casting skepticism on whether or not it's committing its crimes. But it's really important because it causes isolation. And one of the things, or one of the pillars in how Israel sustains itself is it tries to create a sense of normalcy, that it is a legitimate state, it's a normal state, that you just have relations with, and that it's just in a conflict with these savage Palestinians. So it really stems from that narrative that we need to rupture. And it's really important because it denormalizes for the colonizers themselves what they are doing. You can't keep colonialism comfortable for the settlers, right? So you need to rupture that. And things like the academic boycott are even more so critical and important because we're seeing engagement on research that includes, again, using Palestinians as a human laboratory, research that is advancing genocidal wars. It is not innocent. It is using the intelligence and the intellect of people to commit these crimes, and it is really important to refuse to do that for the institutions, for the people, and for the future of science and what it brings to societies. But it's really important to recognize that because Israel did turn education spaces into a battlefield, you know? And more so than that, the amount of control that I see on international institutions is really warrants an examination of it. I was at and I'll end on this note in terms of the academic boycott, but it's so crucial, and that doesn't mean it won't come with pushback. So we also recognize the efforts that are happening here, but we were at the University of Ghent. I was a few days ago, and there was a meeting with the students with the director, and they kept asking for divestment from Israeli institutions and Teva Pharmaceuticals. And she said, but we'll, incur $50 million or euros in loss. And it was so striking for me that that was more important than 50,000 people being killed. So we need to come back to recognize what is on the line here and to also acknowledge all the efforts being put, because we'll see no change, but there really is. More isolation is being felt by the institutions.
One of the things struck me, what you said, is we need to rupture the narrative. And I've been working in Dutch and Western media for a bit, and you see the ease with how an Hamas is described as a terrorist organization, or everything what Hamas does is described as terrorism, and the difficulty to describe anything in Israel as apartheid, or to describe Israel as a settler colonial state, to mention that it's genocide in Gaza. That's a tremendous difficulty to get these kind of things there, even to mention Israel as the perpetrator of a crime. It seems like there's a huge threshold to get there. So in that sense, there's a big narrative indeed that I think needs to be ruptured there, but where do you start? How do you do that? Both.
You want me to start? I thought it was direct to you. I slept through. No. I will. I do. I'm joking. I think that, language is a good place to start with. The vocabulary is very important. And a very good place to start with the vocabulary is the academia. Because one of the things that Israel is doing so far successfully, but I think they're losing that battle, is to say that, you know, if you frame Israel as an apartheid state, if you frame the actions in Gaza as genocide, or the actions of Israel in the West Bank and as ethnic cleansing, or Zionism as settler colonialism, it's an opinion. And you know, the Israelis can say we're generous, it's okay, as long as you are willing to hear the facts, which are exactly the opposite of that opinion. Now, what we know is that most of the genuine and professional academics who have been working on Palestine, whether it's history or contemporary reality, believe that these terms, apartheid, genocide, settler colonialism, are the result of their research. It's not their political opinions. These are facts. These are established facts. And if you insist that it's not one narrative against the other, this is the right way to describe the reality from the point of view of international law, from the point of view of political science, from the point of view of our discipline of history. This is something that academia can play a very important role, because then the media might follow, and eventually, and only then eventually, the politicians. Don't expect the politician to adopt the vocabulary as the first line of change. Neither don't expect the media to do it. But if you want to be loyal to research, to your role as people who devote their professional life for examining realities, this is the language that you use. Nobody says that the Russian actions in the Ukraine are self-defense as a product of academic research. They say this is the position of the Russian government. This is not the same thing here. And I think that's how you begin with narrative, because we have to understand the structure of how people describe reality goes from the people who are supposed to be the one who produce the narrative, how it goes to our textbooks in schools, to our curricula in the university, and then it gets into the public discourse, and so on. It's not surprising, and why do I say that we are winning this? Because Israel puts so much effort now to silence academics who are using their academic credentials to say these things. Now, look what happened. Human rights organization that you would have thought should have been the first one to say we're using this language. When did they start talking about Zionism as settler colonialism and Israel as an apartheid state? Only after academics for 25 years told them, you can now safely do it. If you want, you can use our article, you can use our research. You would have expected them to do it by themselves. But for good or for worse, that's the structure of the production of knowledge, especially in the West. And I think we now are not, there's no need for more research to show that this vocabulary is the right one. Now we need to defend the people who are doing that research. For that reason, I founded in Exeter the first ever Center for Palestine Studies in a university. There were, of course, other centers, but it was the first center, was organic part of the university department. It's like a department in the university for Palestine studies. And now there are 10 like this in the world. And the reason was what we needed a safe space for academics to say Israel is an apartheid state. I say it as a PhD student. That's my doctorate. I understand what apartheid is. I examined Israel, not because I'm a Palestinian, not because I'm a pro-Palestinian, but because I devoted 4 years of my life to understand what apartheid is, what is racism, what is settler colonialism, and here is my result. And we need to respect these results. And we need to ask the media and then the politicians to say, why are you not respecting the reality? Why are you willing to continue to fabricate, to manipulate and not respect your own institutions, your own knowledge producers when it comes to Palestine.
Rupturing language. It's really hard these days because if you look at media and you look at policy briefings and how politicians speak, they enact something that's called strategic ambiguity. So even things like terrorism isn't fully defined, right? So they can throw it and plaster it wherever they want and criminalize whomever they want. And that's why it's really important to carve out or unearth the language that is appropriate and accurate. When Palestinians say we are resisting, that is the accurate word to describe what is happening. When Palestinians say we are being ethnically cleansed, we are being genocided, that is the accurate way of describing it. And there are several issues on why I think, especially in the West, it's easier for Palestinians to rupture language because we can't afford otherwise. But in the West, there's this thing where we tend to see an overcomplication of issues, so they are turned into a matter of debate and this kind of intellectual masturbation of topics rather than an actual discussion on things. And then there's this tendency to use euphemisms for difficult things. You don't want to get uncomfortable. You don't want to be agitated. Recognizing what colonialism really is may somehow force you to recognize how the Netherlands was complicit in colonialism, and did it really rectify those crimes and have a reckoning with itself. So I think this is why we need to rupture language, not just to name things as they are, but to create a safer place. Like we were speaking, Ilan and I, we were saying how once you name the problem, not only can you finally solve it, but you will get through it. You know, sometimes we're afraid, especially if you're on the inflicting of colonialism and you're afraid to call things as they are because you have to have a reckoning with yourself, but you'll get through it. It's better than denying it, right? And I think that's why we have to rupture language, because it's really, really important. There's this thing, I don't know, but we see a lot in the psychology of things. They tell you, no, you need to tell yourself, I am, or I will do this, or you will never. If you speak negatively, for example, to yourself, you're never gonna do whatever it is you want. You have to, it's the way you speak, the way you carve out the language is how we move forward. And that's why I think it's really important, because it's not just the words we use, but it can also be omission. It is not without accident that media says Palestinians died, never names the perpetrator. So we need to remember that language is also bringing that to the forefront.
Thank you. Okay, so it's time to give the audience a chance to ask questions. Good. Oh, then the hands are already in the air. We have some people who are going to help with the microphones, so I'm going to wait for them. Please wait until I give you the word and until you have a microphone in front of you, because we have also people joining us in live stream, and otherwise they cannot hear you. And again, please be short, concise, and formulate a question. Yes, let me see. Okay, there was a gentleman there, in the middle. He was very, very fast. I'm going to do this first. Let's take a few questions. You, yeah? Then you.
I have a question for Ilan Pappé, because it's not every day that we have an expert on the global Israel lobby in the Netherlands. You wrote a book in the summer of 2024, Lobbying for Zionism, in which you show that Zionism started as a lobby and also continues to this day to maintain itself through an aggressive lobby. The Concertgebouw tomorrow was already mentioned. I think this wouldn't have been possible without, again, the involvement of the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs and also local Zionist organizations. So my question is, do you agree that we won't be able to change Dutch government policy without dismantling these lobby structures globally? And could you perhaps give your comment on the Dutch Israel lobby from your expertise? Thank you.
I'm going to take a few more.
Yeah.
Then,
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yes, this lady here, in the blue. It's fishing. It's in Dutch. It's golden hengel, fishing rod, the microphone. Yeah, this lady in the blue. Yep.
Hello. My question is about silence and about Marine 1 and Marine 2 in the maritime domain of Gaza that nobody talk about, and I find very strange. And I have a question. It can be do you think it can be a reason why Europa look the other side, maybe to have a part of the gas field? I am talking about the gas field of Gaza, where it is for milliards and milliards of gas, and where a contract was signed by Netanyahu in November 2024.
The gas field. Oh, yeah. And there was a gentleman here. Yeah.
How much?
I want to say with the kafia, but there are many. One of them.
Very clear.
Yes.
Thank you. One small comment and a question. The comment is that the expert Ras Segal is speaking about more than 130,000 people dead already. So 50,000 is an underestimation. Second, my question is, how can we tackle the big problem of the cognitive dissonance that is endemic in Europe, as Kenneth Roth has also stated, Kenneth Roth of Human Rights Watch. So there's a big problem with cognitive dissonance here, and how can we solve that?
The first one was about the lobby. I think the lobby will be part of our life for a while. But I don't think we should expect a total defeat of the lobby in order to improve the reality on the ground. The question is connected, I think, to also to the third question. So I'll fuse them together. I think the power of the lobby depends on the essence of politics that we have in this country and many other countries. Because the lobby, especially in the case of the Zionist lobby, does not believe it has to influence society. They don't care much about what society thinks. They believe it's enough to have a lot of power over political elites, financial elites, mainstream media. If you have that, it's okay even to operate in a country where maybe the majority of the people are pro-Palestinians. So the question is, why does politics in this country and other countries do not reflect what so many people in their own society feel about Palestine? And I believe this is connected to the false impression that we have that because we live in democracies, our political elite necessarily represent our concerns, whether it's our concern about ecology, poverty, immigration, Palestine, for that sense. So the lobby can work on a fertile ground where you can use intimidation and inducement because politicians care about their career and not about their agendas. And therefore you can either intimidate them or you can seduce them. And if you have the power to do this, it's fine. So for me, to put it differently, the more we succeed in struggling against the injustices in our own societies, the more we succeed in the struggle against injustice in Palestine. Yeah. I don't think we can separate that. People try to separate it. People would say, okay, this guy is from the far right, but for some reason he has a compassion for Palestinians. God knows why. But on other issues we don't agree because he is a racist and so on. It doesn't work like this. It doesn't work like this. We need to create that kind of alliance that is the counter-alliance to the alliance that conceived Zionism, protected Israel over the years, and now maintains Israel. And that alliance is built from people who are fighting injustice more than just on the question of Palestine. Maybe the gas, I think I didn't understand, if I understood correctly the question of the gas fields. I know it comes up all the time as if one of the major I'm sorry if I misunderstood the question, but if it relates to the gas fields as one of the major motives for the Israeli action in Gaza, I don't think that this is true. I'm not saying that they're not going to think that they can benefit from it, but Zionism, through the State of Israel, works towards the Palestinian not on the basis of getting gas fields or...
The action of Europeans.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I wish it was that simple. I don't think that the European, or let's say the EU, because Europe is so big, European complicity with the actions of Israel is not because of the gas fields of Gaza. To my mind, it has a lot to do with the fact that Israel thinks it's part of Western Europe thinks that Israel is part of it, and if you open up the question of what's wrong with Israel, you're open up a lot of other difficult questions. Put it nicely, as we are guests.
Okay, great, yes. So we have, okay, I'm going to take this one. So here, one first. Yeah, we'll have enough time, don't worry.
Hi, first of all, Ilan, name מאוד להכיר. We talk about sanctions all the time. It hasn't happened here yet. My university, the University of Amsterdam, has cut academic ties with Israel way too late. So my question is, how do we operationalize it? What do privileged European citizens who have no fear of deportation, what can they demand from their governments to actually make it more of a burden to maintain ties than Israel than to cut them?
Thank you. Farid? Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's working, yeah. Thank you very much for this talk. Just two short questions. One of them was on the role of academia. In ideal time, I do agree with you that academia should be at the basis of acquiring knowledge, and then maybe society will follow. But what do you make about the authoritarian turn against academia nowadays, not only when it comes to Palestine, but also when it comes to the climate crisis? So how do we deal with that? Academia is now under full-on assault. The second question was about what you said about after the Second World War. So what kind of strategy do you have to open up that conversation? Because it's a painful conversation for Europe to talk about that anti-Semitism after the Second World War and how that led partly to the establishment of Israel. Because I think Palestinians will not be free until Jews in Europe feel completely free. So how do we open up that conversation? Because it's not going to be easy. Thank you.
Thanks. And yeah, this lady in the black. Yes, yeah. Yep.
Good afternoon. Mr. Pappé, you talked about the experience of scholars that decided that there is a fact of genocide on the ground, and that may be a starting point for more actions. But what about all the findings that are written down in United Nations resolutions since '48? There is a record from here to Tokyo maybe, and why can't we use more of the resolutions to put a finger on the nail and force Israel to another policy?
Okay, I'm going to take a few more. Yeah, that.
Easy to understand.
Okay, there's so many people. That lady in the middle. But please make it short.
Justice delayed is justice denied. And we've been waiting now for a good year for the International Court of Justice to come to some ruling on whether genocide has been committed. This is frequently used in discussions. When you raise the question of genocide, we have to use euphemisms like genocidal activities. Do you think that we should be pushing more to demand that the ICJ come up with a ruling much sooner? That was my first question. The second question is the weaponization of the Holocaust. This, I think, is a very important problem for European countries to see what's happening in Gaza as an extension and in some way linked to the Holocaust and our opposition to everything that happened in the Holocaust. There are many Jews who are Holocaust survivors who see in Gaza the images of their own trauma. And in some way we have to neutralize the monopoly and the appropriation of the Holocaust by the State of Israel. How would you see us doing that?
Okay, let's start with a specific question, and then hopefully I understood most of the question as a general ones. The question for what can be done more academically, it's true that universities are two things. They are, nowadays, they are both management that look at universities as business, as a corporation, and they are still a community of scholars. And the government prefers to deal with the management because the management is much easier to be manipulated. It deals with the issue of budgets, recognition, and so on. So I don't expect the management of universities to lead the way on academic boycott, and therefore I don't think they will pressure the government to take issues.
No, my question was regarding what can Dutch people, what can everyone here do? And, like the academia was just like an example.
Okay.
What can each person in the camp do to demand, to make it more inconvenient for
I thought you were talking about the academia.
more inconvenient for the Netherlands to maintain their ties with Israel than
Okay,
so the question is more general.
More general about the ordinary. Okay,
What can people
fair
do
enough.
for those of you
fair enough.
who can't hear?
You know, I think neither Mariam and I, or I, if I may speak on your behalf as well, have any complaints about the solidarity movement with the Palestinians by the Europeans since October 2023. To see millions of people in Italy demonstrating for Palestine, to see numbers in the Netherlands we've never seen before supporting for Palestine. There's I don't see the point of telling people in the Netherlands what you can do more. We all have the same problem. In the Netherlands, we have the problem in Egypt. We have the problem in Saudi Arabia. And not only, and we have the problem in the UK. There is a gap between the political elite's perspective on Palestine and Israel and what a lot of people in the society feel should be that perspective. How to narrow the gap, that was my point before, to narrow the gap between what we would like the governments to do and what they are actually doing on Palestine is not only connected to Palestine. That was my point. So I think it has to be connected with what we think about the essence of politics. Because let's face it, without insulting anyone in this audience, I don't remember a period in history when politicians were on such a low caliber. Really, they are not impressive people. They are self-centered, they are all taking the model from America. The image in television is much more important than anything else, especially in the Netherlands. I saw it, that they become more and more like movie stars instead of politicians. And they see politics as a career, not as a vocation. And so we have a huge problem here that is beyond Palestine. It's beyond Palestine. Now, there are two ways, in my mind, to deal with it. You say the big revolution, and we all want that big revolution, in the essence of politics, in the way the global society cooperates on issue of ecological justice, economic justice, social justice will take place, and we all want to be part of it. But we have an urgency. We want to save the Palestinians from the continued destruction that Israel imposes on them. So we can't be purist about it. So we have to find a way of talking with the very same politicians and the very same journalists for whom, let's face it, we don't have much respect, and yet they are the ones who can do something, at least at this very moment. So we take a pill against being sick, and we go and talk, and we try to convince, or we make sure that electorally, it's not worth their while to take the position that they take, not because we convince them morally. On the other hand, let's be inspired a little bit by the communities of New York. I mean, the biggest Jewish city in the world, and half of the Jews in New York voted for a mayor who is outspoken on the question of Palestine. So this was an electorate that voted morally for the mayor. So it's possible. It's also possible. So we need to work on all these distinctions, levels. Kind of rounding up, and I do ask for forgiveness if I don't relate, because I'm sure Mariam will fill the gaps of all the questions I don't answer. I think that there is something there of the question of what can be done more than is being done now. And I think that I'll go back to the academia just as an example. Because even if the university signs an agreement with an Israeli university, it's up to the professors and the lecturers to decide whether they are taking part of it. Now, they might not do it because they're afraid. And academic courage can be an oxymoron. But Palestine deserves our courage. And Palestine cannot afford our cowardness. And it would be, you know, if I talk to young people who just joined the Solidarity movement, I never tell them that what you will do will not be with a price. That it's a walk in the... I tell them, you know, support the Ukraine, it's a picnic. Everybody, from the prime minister to the priest, would tell you you are a sacred person. Support the Palestinians, you risk in getting a lot of curses, you may be suspended from your job. Yes, but we live only once, at least according to my understanding. I understand that there are some other options, but as far as I know. And I think that a little bit of courage gives a meaning to life. And this is something that I found out when I participated in a demonstration of 1 million people in Italy. The young Italians who went to the demonstration felt that although they didn't think the demonstration would convince Meloni to change her policy, but they felt that they are doing something that would create a backlash from the police, would create a backlash from the government, but is so morally correct that they were proud to be part of that historical movement. So I think we'll have to find a way to galvanize even more people, to say to them, quite a lot of people in the Netherlands were on the wrong side of history in the Second World War. A lot of people in Europe were on the wrong side of history. You don't want to be once more on the wrong side of history. And the way to do it is to work for Palestine. Thank you. I don't remember the question.
Mariam, you want to? Okay. I'll see what I can add to this. So you were mentioning how there was a cutting of ties by the university too late. There was a mentioning of justice delayed, justice denied, and how things are moving really slowly. I really want to remind everyone, we're seeing this in the last 2 years, I assume mostly the reference. We've been waiting nearly 8 decades for change.
Absolutely.
So we need to remember that things won't happen very quickly, and that should not dissuade you from continuing and finding different avenues. As Palestinians, we offered the avenue of boycotting, divestment, and sanctions. We offered the avenues of, okay, let's seek international law, also failed. And again, I think we keep having faith in international law, but we're at a point where we need to have a conversation about the enforcement of international law. Not what is outlined, but how do we enforce it? Because we're clearly failing. If resolutions could free Palestine, we would have been free a long time ago. But we need to have that conversation and to find your new ways of confrontation. I think there's a big issue also is that as Palestinians, we're constantly looked at to provide the answers, and we are just people. In the end, we are also really tired of just surviving, that we need you to come up with the answers of how to make your places better, right? That's, yeah. The reason your policymakers aren't listening to you, that's a you problem that we need you to figure out. But, you know, and things about, I want to just make two comments. One is about the weaponizing of the Holocaust, and two, what you can do here. The reason Israel can weaponize the Holocaust is because there was no reckoning in Europe. Europe was never held accountable. The moment that happens, that ceases to happen as well. And I think we keep forgetting that. That weaponization didn't exist in a vacuum, so we need to recognize and think, Europe needs to think about how to rectify that problem. The first and foremost is creating a safe space for Jews to be able to come back from the places they were genocided in, and they were kicked out of in these very ugly ways. That really needs to be sat with, because Palestinians are paying the price for it. And what can you do? So what can we do in terms of how to move forward? So what I've seen things here is civil servants, for example, are holding sit-ins weekly. It is so important to go and show support, ask how you can help with that. It is important to find other ways. You don't just need to, you know, stand outside or protest in their streets. You can send the emails, you can make the phone calls, you can hold the dinners, to have the hard conversations and hold space. Because as Palestinians, we really are also very tired of educating. Ilan's also tired of educating. And we need you to take that role and an initiative with yourself. And I think that's what will help with the cognitive dissonance, is when you offer the tools and you allow people the capacity to change. That's really important to recognize that. Yes, so to uplift civil servants, and to choose avenues to educate each other about your rights. I know for the longest time, international aid agencies would come to Palestine and teach us about our rights and international law and women's rights and all of that. And then I come here and I'm like, huh, I think there's a problem here. Maybe we should come teach here what we learned. So to actually, go through, to know your rights, well, who you can hold legally liable in terms of engaging in war crimes under your name, and how to move forward with that. And the last thing I would say is also center Palestinian voices. Okay. To remember to do that. I love Ilan, love sitting with him and speaking with him, but I'm going to invite you to use your imagination right now. If it was me and a Palestinian historian saying the same exact things, how well would you have absorbed it? And if there's a question on how well you absorbed it, sit with that, please. It's telling you something. So that's also the number one thing, and how you can change society, because we are so absent from the conversation. Ilan said at the beginning about the peace process, Palestinians were never asked. We continue to not be asked, and we continue to be treated as people with opinion, not experts, on what we want and need. So that would be the final thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these very important words, also of important reminders. We have some time for one last round, quick round, because Ilan needs to not miss his flight. So we really need to finish in time. Yeah. Yes, you you in the middle, and you for now, and then you. Yeah, so we have 4, and if you can keep it
Actually,
short.
my name is Ismail Saeed. I'm a Palestinian journalist and writer from Gaza, and we have a very essential, unsophisticated question. On behalf of our families in Gaza Strip, what is the first possible step that our people of Gaza can take to rebuild their lives amid the ongoing genocide, ethnic cleansing, and apartheid system? That's it.
First step.
Because
first step, yeah, a good question.
Yes. Yeah, the gentleman in the, with the black hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is a question to both Ilan and Mariam. So Ilan, you talked about this, let's say, post-structuralist approach to dismantling and rebuilding language structures as a way to, let's say, rehumanize Palestinians and also restructure the whole situation in Israel. Mariam, you also make the excellent point of the shift in our perception. So one where we recognize the ambiguity or fluidity of language and the way it is weaponized in politics. In other words, language has become much more difficult to deconstruct in our modern world because of this fluid nature that we attribute to it. So to both of you, what in your experiences have you found as effective methods to dismantle these existing language structures? So as an example, how do we cause people to fundamentally recognize the falsehoods in framing the last 2 years as a war?
Yeah.
Thank you. 2 questions if you make it short. Can you hear it? Yeah, we don't hear
him.
Yeah.
How can we move the narrative away from the two-state solution to a more realistic peace solution? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Nikita.
Join the Hamla. Yeah, good.
Hello, my question is for Ilan and Mariam. Ilan referred to a fertile ground for extortion and blackmail and intimidation, and Mariam emphasized the necessity of international law being enforced. How would you comment regarding the ICC and so many high officials who are issuing the arrest warrants being pressured? And what do you see as the future perspective in order to have no blackmail and extortion at the international level? And my friend is on a wheelchair. She had also another question.
Yeah, Tagit, you can have the last one. You cannot deny you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ilan. I have a question for you. I mean, like, the Israeli society was not mentioned at all here, and I am very interested in your analysis. And, you know, is there any hope that can come out of that? Because, you know, realistically speaking, we don't have an alternative to Netanyahu, and he may win the elections. But the question here, when it comes to the Israeli society, even those who regard themselves as moderate Israelis, they will never accept you or accept someone like me to use the word genocide. Why is that? Why they cannot, even those who refer to themselves as leftists, as they cannot accept the word genocide? And I will leave it to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, quickly as much as I can.
Yeah, you need to be brief.
All right, the first step, I think you're right, we are. And I think we talked with Mariam about it, this kind of tension between the need to strategize. So we're thinking about strategy in the long term, Palestinians, supporters of Palestine, thinking about the strategy, and this relates to the question that were asked afterwards, challenging the narrative, and so on, and the immediate need to save the Palestinians from the next step. Or the first step, as you rightly call it. And I think that the most urgent method, the most urgent assignment we have, and I agree with Mariam, some of the answer to how to deal with it cannot only come from us, it has to come from you as well. But I can at least define the assignment. And the assignment is, there is a lie going on, that the genocide is over. There's a lie going on as if the genocide is not continuing in the West Bank in a different way. There's a lie that the last 2 years was a war that has ended with a ceasefire. These are all lies. These are all fabrications. done by our mainstream media, by our mainstream politicians. We have to find a way to say to them, first of all, and I think Mariam said it in a different way, first of all, if you want to have the conversation, let's get the conversation on the basis of facts, what goes on the ground. And if you don't know, we will help you to know. There are so many Palestinians who can tell you what happens. You were unable to get one Western journalist into the Gaza Strip, but we, the Palestinians in Gaza, produced 100 journalists. In one day we produced them, and they are not less good than you are as professional journalists. And the Israelis killed them because they were good journalists. Otherwise, they would not have killed them. And I think this is something we have to find a way that not allowing, because it mesmerizes. The conversation of peace is very mesmerizing. If you say Trump says there's now a Council of Peace, look at the United Nations. Even the United Nations voted for this absurd idea that people like Tony Blair, who's like appointing Dracula to the blood bank, is someone like this should now run the whole process after all the failures and the terrible things that were done in the name of this process. We have such a clear, tangible targets to deal with. So I think we should find a way of doing it. As for the ICC and ICJ, and then I'll go to states and one state, and what you ask of Israel quickly. You see, I think that I really won't hold my breath about the ICC and ICJ, not because it's not important. I have a lot of respect for what they did, and it is an indicator for the long run. For the long run, it will be remembered as a landmark in the change. But for it to be effective, the whole concept of international law has to be rethought. International law was born in 1948 without consultation of 2/3 of the world that was colonized. In 1960, international legal systems were willing to regard colonialism as a crime against humanity, but refused, under the insistence of the United States, Israel, Canada, Australia, and apartheid South Africa, to regard settler colonialism as violation of international law. We have a problem with the whole system, and we need to find a way to make it universal. If you cannot do it in The Hague, we will move it together with the United Nations to Nairobi. We need a safe space. It seems that the West is not a safe space for international organizations. The one-state solution, I think, I'm part of an initiative called the One Democratic State Initiative. My friend from Gaza is also supporting us. We believe we are a number of Palestinians and Jews who believe that we want the Palestinian national movement to re-adopt the one-state solution as a vision for all of us, take us into that direction. And I think when there will be a clear Palestinian voice on the one state, there will be a better response from the international community. Israel, I would just say something about the left in Israel. I suggest people should read Albert Mamie. Albert Mamie talked about the left colonizers. And he said, the left colonizer is really a genuine person who wants to square universal values with his support for colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and oppression. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And whenever someone exposes this inability, he becomes much more of a colonizer than a socialist. There is no progressive ethnic cleanser, there is no democratic genocider, and there is no socialist occupier. Either you are that or the other. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mariam, do you have last words or your...
I'll answer the question. I want to just say something about the state solutions, that there's an obsession with state solutions. I think the first conversation is accountability, and then don't worry about it. I think it'll be sorted much more easily, because you need to remember the idea of a state solution is also a Western concept. Before Palestine as Palestine, Lebanon as Lebanon, there was the Levant. And I think that's it's a trap sometimes for us to get stuck in that debate. I'll remark quickly on why the Israelis are not accepting the word genocide, because they are the criminals. No criminal accepts saying what they are doing. It's really basic, yeah. But in terms of the dismantling language, and I'll end here, it is really difficult. I don't think it's dismantling language as much as it is using the proper terms and phrases in their right places. And a lot of what helped me rupture my own ideas was reading a lot. And that is reading about previous experiences around the world, reading about the Black struggle, reading about the Jewish struggle, reading about the colonialism in the United States, for example. There were terms here and there that help you draw parallels and understand the reality, and then carve out your own term. The term genocide was created by Lemkin out of necessity, right? It didn't exist. So we need to find new ways. And look, it's a lot of work to do that, but it's reading a lot, looking at different ways that people cover the issues, policy papers, things like that, so you can understand what's being said to you. And then the last thing is read more Arab authors. Stop looking for the answers in European writers, you know? And that's it. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I want to thank Ilan and Mariam for being with us, for sharing your critical thoughts, your experiences. It was really a pleasure and an honor to have you here with us in Amsterdam. Thank you so much. Yeah, Ilan. Thank you. Love.